We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Lisa K. Donner and Tim Donner. Earlier in the show, we talked the winners, those who advanced their cause, and those who lost out in the recent GOP primary presidential debate. Now, for our last segment today, gang, what I'd really like to talk about is what kind of calculations is Donald Trump doing right now? Obviously, he's had... I think it's fair to say that the GOP debate, it really was a vice presidential interview or an episode of The Apprentice reborn, as I pointed out earlier. But what kind of calculations is Donald Trump doing now? Who's definitely out? Who's a contender? I think let's start with Lisa. What do you think? Who's I think we could. No, in fact, let's just rule out the obvious ones. Chris Christie is not going to be Donald Trump's VP pick. That's
neither
not going to
happen.
Asa Hutchinson.
And neither is Mike Pence.
And neither is Mike Pence.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, that would be the getting the band back together. That would be an interesting one. So getting the band back together, that he's off the list. Doug Burgum, I mean,
No.
he seems like a nice guy. But
most people in North Dakota don't even know who he is.
Yeah,
I think even well-informed people aren't sure he was the governor of North Dakota. You know, it's like, is he still the governor? What's going on?
Yeah,
North Dakota.
You know, I had to go to Ballotpedia to check if he was still the governor.
I know.
Right.
That's what you call a pure vanity candidacy. He's doing it because he's got the money to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he wants to be, I think his main pitch, sorry, just to get back into, his main pitch was that he wants to be the energy guy, that's his sale. So Donald Trump was the immigration guy. Doug Burgum wants to be the energy guy, which is a great position to be in, but I don't think it's enough to sell it. So let's put Doug Burgum to the side as well. But let's not put him in a basket of deplorables because that's not what we do here. But what's the electoral math here for Donald Trump? Lisa, who do you think's who are the top two for Donald Trump to pick from?
I think it's got to be Tim Scott. And, you know, I'm not sure. I don't think he's hep to Haley because she was his ambassador to the UN. She left in the middle. And I know, Tim, you said that's not a big deal. Lots of people leave in the middle of their appointments, but I think that was a high profile appointment, and I don't think he was pleased by her leaving. I'm not sure who the second is. You know, obviously DeSantis is the dream team for a lot of people, but there's a lot of rancor between the two of them now that there didn't used to be. So that might be
that bridge is burned, right?
I don't know. You know, it could be. What do you think, Tim? Especially when we're talking electoral math, the person you want to talk to is Mr. Donner.
Absolutely right. Tim?
Well, since the last two elections in 16 and 20 were decided by basically about 40 or 50,000 votes in 3 or 4 states, it's the same election this time. It's a very narrow number of votes that will make the difference between them, most likely. You see not a whole lot changing from 2024, where you had 2020, where you have people on both sides voting for their person in spite of the questions or issues that they may have had with him before. I think Tim Scott seems like an obvious choice for Trump. He has said in the past, at least once, that Tim Scott is, quote, overqualified to be his VP. Now, some take that to mean that he's ruling him out. Some take it, and this is how I take it, that he's ruling him in. Say,
it's the Kamala Harris
Tim
thing,
Scott,
isn't it?
Yeah.
Transitional candidate.
Right.
As a transitional candidate, only he actually has some electoral appeal, unlike Kamala Harris, who, by the way, they're now stuck with because they can't dump her from the ticket.
It would look really bad. That would not be a good move.
Right. So, I think there is a question of whether Scott would take it because of how controversial Trump is.
No, I think he would take it.
My answer to that is if he wasn't going to take it, he wouldn't be running this time. Although
me ask,
some will say he's just trying to expose himself for 2028 when the whole thing will start all over again, whether Trump wins or loses.
Tim, just a quick interruption here. What did you think of the RNC bank your vote thing? Do you think that Republicans are going to go for this?
I think they're going to have to. I think they realize after 2020, the biggest single mistake politically that Donald Trump made in 2020 was to demonize mail-in voting instead of getting on the bandwagon. And 75% of votes were cast before Election Day in 2020. The Republicans have no choice but to hit this and hit it a lot harder, frankly, than they have. They've got to drill into their constituents that if you don't want a repeat of 2020, you need to vote early, if not often.
Yeah, just on that topic, it's funny, isn't it? Pretty much everything is becoming more done from your home, done from your mobile phone. You know, we do our shopping online. Well, many people do shopping online. We deal with our bank from our home. It's the direction of everything moving forward that's decentralized from you have to go to a brick and mortar building. And why wouldn't voting be any different? I mean, there are a lot of arguments against the idea, and I am on board with some of them, but it is absolutely the direction that things are going. My electoral math on this, and it might not be accurate, but you made a point earlier, Lisa, that Vivek rhymes with cake and many other words that are less flattering. It is a bit too much of an alpha, and there'd be Donald Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy, and that's two big personalities clashing. But as Tim points out, there's only one term here. And Donald Trump's gone the route before with a vice president of somebody who's a polar opposite to him.
That's a good point.
Much more relaxed to do that thing. And I think now Donald Trump doesn't have the luxury, if he wins, of 8 years to get things done. He's got 4 years. He doesn't need a scalpel. He needs a sledgehammer. And I think that Vivek Ramaswamy is potentially that sledgehammer. And also, he'd be somebody who would almost carry on that kind of thing, because although we have seen in his interviews having a little difficulty on flipping positions, but I think that if he gets started in the VP position as a sledgehammer, making things happen, I think he has the energy, not just because of his youth, but just because of his actual personality. He has the energy to carry that on, running for president himself in 2028. What do you reckon to that?
I'd be interested in hearing what somebody of Vivek's generation has to say. You know, how did they feel about his performance? I can tell you from our perspective.
I'm not far from his generation, and I think his rapping on stage doesn't appeal to anybody. Sorry, carry on.
Okay, well, that's interesting. But, you know, to the typical older set, I think he came off as too hot for a cool medium and too alpha to be a foil for Donald Trump. That's just my opinion, but you asked for it.
We absolutely did. Tim?
There's a good point to be made here, which is that which could be one of the reasons that Trump would pick DeSantis. It's not going to happen. But one of the reasons he could do that now when he couldn't really do it 4 years ago is his ego cannot process the idea of somebody else taking center stage or taking.
Tim, is it fair to say his ego? I mean, is it fair to say his ego? I mean, who wants to be president and have your vice president be picking at you?
Well, right, but the point that I make, right, I agree, but the point is that now he doesn't have to, quote, watch his back over someone who is forming an independent power base, right, which you could with a strong candidate running for potentially 8 years. He doesn't have to watch his back, so to speak, and his ego doesn't need to be satiated like it was by picking someone like Pence, who was quintessentially willing to be a number 2 guy and stand quietly behind him and nod his head most of the time. But now there's no reason to have to worry about someone forming an independent power base privately. Trump can pick someone who will help him get done what he needs to get done in the next 4 years. So I think he needs to think of it in terms of who advances the ball the most for my agenda.
Can we say an effective political ticket is like a good marriage? And that is when you can promote the other person instead of promoting yourself? Just saying.
I would say that is a great analogy to end on. Is Donald Trump looking for a faithful wife or a fling in the dark? Tim Donner and Lisa Donner, thank you ever so much for being here. Much
Thanks,
appreciated.
Mark. That's great.
Thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Lisa K. Donner and Tim Donner. Thank you both for being here. My thanks to you, the listeners, for taking the time to tune in. We'll see you next week right here on Liberty Nation Radio. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.